Welcome. Happy Friday. Today is Friday, May the 13th. Ooh, Friday the 13th. I didn't even realize that until right now. Anyway, this is episode number 159 of Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers. My name is Frederick Dunn, and this is the way to be. So I'm glad that you're here. I hope you enjoyed that opening sequence, which, by the way, shows that the Layens hive that a lot of people have been following, it's a horizontal hive designed after the design. It's purchased from horizontalhive.com, Dr. Leo Sharishkin's website, and it's the one that's insulated with lamb's wool. So, finally, I have bees in it. 75 degrees outside, but it's rising rapidly, so we're going to get into the 80s today. Could be a lot going on in the bee yard, and we have storms and rain coming this weekend. So, but for right now, things are fantastic. What else can I tell you? If you want to know what we're going to talk about today, please look down in the video description below and you'll see every topic that we're going to hit on and some links that are going to be helpful to you. So I'm glad that you're here. If you're brand new, by the way, this is a playlist. So if you go to my YouTube channel, because the YouTube channel is titled Frederick Dunn. If you go there, there are a bunch of playlists. So you can look at some specific topic, but the Q&A series is a playlist by itself. And I'm just glad you're here. So let's get into some of these questions because I have work to do in the bee yard today before the storms come. Afternoon is a perfect time. So the first question comes from Kelly from East Orange, New Jersey. As you've been mentioning, it's swarm season. I recently caught a swarm and had 4 queens. All appeared to be virgins. What would you do in that circumstance? Okay, so it is swarm season. That's what everybody's going to be talking about here in the northeastern United States, by the way. State of Pennsylvania is where I live. And I got my first swarm, as I mentioned already, because I had to collect a swarm to put it into my Layens hive. So I did that by the way, collecting them in a large butterfly net and setting the butterfly net full of bees right up against, it's important, physically against the front of the hive, because the Layens hive has the little control wheels there, little opening, and I decided to let the bees figure out if they wanted to move in there or not. So I didn't shake any bees inside the hive at all. I just put it there and let them start checking it out, and it was looking bad, because what the bees did, the swarm collected over the whole face of the hive, and they seemed to be blocking the entrance. They weren't even going to go in. By the following morning, so they were installed on the 10th of May. The following morning, they were all inside. Within 2 days, they were bringing in pollen. So they've settled. They're in there. So swarms are helpful, and for me, that was the only way that I could get a colony of bees in there without having to buy in a package or something like that. So I needed a swarm because I didn't want to transfer the frames and try to match up Langstroth with Layens frames and things like that. But the reason I mention that is that first swarm that came out is what we refer to as a prime swarm, the first swarm of the year. And scientists work out these averages, by the way. Healthy colonies that have made it through winter where I live, so in this latitude, I'm 1,300 feet above sea level, by the way. And they say that you can get 2.3 swarms per year on average from one colony. So there you go. I don't know how you work out the 0.3, but anyway, the first swarm's a prime swarm, so that's usually the largest, and this was a nice big one. So it's well fortified, things are going good. And this ties in with the question here because often the reason that your bees swarmed, first of all, is they drove out the queen, but that's your laying queen that got them through winter. Kind of a big loss if she gets away from you. That's why we do splits and things like that and take that queen and put her in a new box if it shows that they're doing things in preparation for causing a swarm. And one of the things that happens is you'll see that there are a bunch of queen cells set up inside the hive in the brood area generally. And so if you haven't done your inspections, and that's understandable because we've had a lot of bad weather, but now that we have a break, you should be out there inspecting your hives to see what's going on. Queen cells let you know they're planning to swarm. Now after that primary swarm goes out, there will be secondary swarms when those queen cells hatch, sometimes. Not always, and that's why this is confusing for people. Sometimes those queens will hatch and there'll be another swarm right away. And when that happens, when the new queens, the virgin queens, emerge from their cells, and sometimes they do this simultaneously, and there can be several of them. And this ties into last year when I had some funny experiences collecting swarms in the bee yard. And that's because these queens that have hatched out are not mated yet. So they're not laying. So their pheromones aren't very strong. And this happens from time to time when you get a cluster of bees on a tree branch or a fence post or whatever. You'll find that you can collect a queen out of that swarm of bees. And then you'll find, and this is the indicator. So, for those of you who are new and figuring this out, when you remove a queen from a swarm, if you can do it, and often they surface, there'll be a little vent hole that kind of opens up in the swarm sometimes, and the queen will come out on the surface, and then she'll turn around and go right back in there, especially on these really hot days. So you can collect that queen, and you can put that queen in a queen cage, and I highly recommend, if you're a new beekeeper or an old beekeeper, have a whole bunch of these very inexpensive queen cages handy. Because once you get your queen, you can put her in that. And this ties in with this question too, because we want to talk about what to do if you get multiple queens. How do you know which one to keep? So in a way, these open up. They have a little cap here on the top. Then you can flip it open, and now you have access to put the queen in there. Then once you get her in there, this is for a sugar plug here, this end piece, but you can wad up a bunch of leaves from dandelions or blades of grass and things like that and stuff it in there and use this for a temporary holding cage. But when you pull that queen out, what should happen is they should very quickly figure out that the queen's pheromone is absent. And because it's an after swarm, it's a non-mated queen, which means her pheromone's going to be kind of weak. If they don't get all excited, and in the absence of their queen, they'll return to the colony that they just came from. Now, if they don't get excited and start moving around and demonstrating that they're missing a pheromone that they needed, that means another queen is probably in that swarm. And this happens a lot with the after swarms, and that's because the queen's not mated. She hasn't had time to mature and mate. So these young queens are just flying out. Sometimes you'll see on an evergreen tree or something like that, which happens here, several tiny clusters of bees separated from one another. Your hives seem to be kind of in sync. And so on a great day for swarming, and we have stormy weather coming up, this seems to happen a lot, that they swarm out just before the storms hit on these nice hot days. But you'll see too that these little clusters of bees tend to migrate towards one another, and then they become one larger cluster. So the question is, why were they clustering in little tiny fist-sized groups on that tree to begin with? It's highly possible that each of those little groups had a queen in them. So then it's happened here. It says, swarm season recently caught a swarm that had 4 queens, all appeared to be virgins. What would you do in that circumstance? So now we've collected after swarms that probably emitted one right after another. And this happens genetically, by the way. Sometimes they have a propensity to swarm, and they can actually swarm a colony to death. They just keep emitting swarms until there aren't even enough residual bees in the hive to keep things going, which is really strange. And that's not good genetic stock, by the way. Those are behaviors you don't want. But anyway, now let's get back to the cage. So since we've identified that there are 4 virgin queens, let's put each of them in a cage. How do we know which one to keep? Yeah, how would we pick it out? Because we know better than the bees because we're beekeepers. Not true. The bees can make their choice, and that's why I say get a bunch of these. Now we put a queen in each of these, right? And we've got the swarm. And it's probably in a box by now. So you can put your swarm that you've collected in a box. They're going to be unstable if they're not in proximity with the queen mandibular pheromone. So lay 4 of these side by side, spaced out about 6 inches, right? And then you're going to see the bees come up and start attending to the virgin queens that are in these cages. And what I would pick is the one that draws the most workers to her cage. And the rest of them, because you can expect probably 1 out of the 4 or 2 out of the 4 to be completely ignored. They're out of the running. So what are you going to do with them? You're going to crush them up into isopropanol, and you can make swarm lures out of them if you want to. But they're not any good in my case because they're subdividing the swarm that you have. So then we're down to a couple of them that look like they're pretty strong. Now, depending on the size of the swarm, but after swarms are small generally, but if it's a large one, you could potentially get 2 out of it. So if they're equally collecting on the cages of 2 queens, then you can create nucleus hives, and that's the other part of your preparation. You have to have small hives available to put them in. And I would put 1 in each, and then see how things go. And if one of them, if the queen flies out, tries to do a mating flight, doesn't return, you have an emergency backup there, and then later you can combine the 2. So that's what I would do in that circumstance. And this was fun. Last year, I was using that Colorado bee vac and having a lot of fun just using it on every swarm I came across for kicks. And then what I would do is, the most effective install was to put the bee vac, because it's designed to fit a 10-frame Langstroth deep, right? So you set it on that, you pull out the cookie sheet that divides it, the bees go in overnight, and I was using a bee escape. And my favorite bee escape for that was the one by Ciracel, the plastic one that went on there. It's lightweight, easy to transport with your vac and everything else. Any bee escape will do, but that one worked really well. And then the following morning, they're all down in there, you take it off. Another thing I like to do is take the same thing, the Colorado bee vac. It's got a screen on one side and the cookie sheet on the other. And then there's a black vacuum intake that has a slider that closes it off. So just for kicks, take that and lean it right against the hive that you want your bees to go into. And you slide open that entrance, and right in front of the entrance of the hive that you're trying to get your bees to go into, and you'll find that the bees will eventually go out, do some exploring, and a few of them will go inside that box. And if they find that it's suitable, they'll all march right out of the bee vac and go right into that hive. And this takes time. So for those of you that are in a big rush, it's not going to work for you. I know that Jim at Vino Farm said he tried it out with package installs, letting them just walk in on their own, and he just ran out of patience. So that's okay. You have to want to sit around and drink your coffee and watch them and maybe make a video of them passing through, which I did. And it's a lot of fun, and then off they go. But here's what happened. They were doing their march, they were going in, and the bees were doing what I expected them to, and they demonstrated that they accepted it. And once they get in there, I knew that a queen went in, because now they have their Nasonov gland open and their little rear ends are in the air and they're fanning and they're trying to get the others to come in. So it stands to reason the rest of the bees in that box would move out and join the others in the upper box, but they didn't. They clustered nice and tight. They stayed down in there overnight. So I was really frustrated. Now those of us who are impatient might go ahead and shake that swarm right into that box. And this is where my method, my patient method of watching them go in on their own, proved to be better. And that's because, guess what? There was another queen. So even though they were clustered together on the tree, the composition of the cluster included 2 queens. And so once the others moved in, the second queen and her following did not go in. So they stayed in the box. So I thought, well, then I'll just take it over to another hive that's empty, put it on their landing board, and I'll see if they'll break cluster and go in. And guess what? They did. So lesson learned. Often there are multiple queens in there, and there are a lot of ways to get them to split themselves up. But they sometimes will not all go into the same hive together, which if they did, if both queens went in there, now we have sister queens that have probably agreed they're genetically very closely related. And you can have a colony with 2 queens that would work together, but these demonstrated they wanted to stay in the box rather than join the others, so then we move them to another one, and then we get 2 colonies out of it. So a lot of fun can be had when you don't need the bees, and you have opportunities to just play with different introduction methods and what to do when there's multiple queens. The bees will show us what's going on, because in the absence of a queen, they're gonna go nuts. They're gonna take off. And that's when they join almost any hive, but those that are on a tree, if you just stole the queen and didn't do anything else with them, and that was the only queen, they would return to the hive that they came from originally. So it's another way, if you think you're losing too many bees, you can do that. Question number 2 comes from Martin in Sweden. I'm using a single deep brood box configuration with medium supers. So far, I only got wax foundation in the supers. I'm wondering if you have any tips on how to make the bees build in the honey supers. These bees are filling up the cells in the brood box with nectar, so the queen are running out of space to lay, and I've been removing queen cups from one of the colonies once a week for some time now. I want to stop at that part there, because this is confusing sometimes for new beekeepers. A queen cup, by the way, refers to a cell that's been enlarged and it's got a little cup that looks like the top of an acorn and there's no egg in it. Just because the bees build one of these cups and they don't put an egg in it does not mean they're planning to swarm, and you really don't have to tear them down. They may rebuild them and they just happen to be there as an insurance policy all the time. What's the difference between a queen cup and a queen cell? The presence of an egg. So if they're just queen cups, no reason to tear them down. I'm not that worried about it. So going on, it says, I'm not using queen excluders to make it easier for the bees to move upstairs. Right now, I have put one frame from the super down into the brood box and removing one honey frame from the hive to make them draw comb on it. I know they might draw some wild comb under 2, so the small frame, but I really need them to draw comb for the supers to get the nectar from the brood box. Another crazy idea I've not tried goes on to say that he would like to take a deep frame, put it up in the medium, and remove the deep frame down below, so now the medium sinks down into part of the deep frame and then lets them build comb underneath. Okay, I'm going to suggest not doing any of that. So, when you have a new colony of bees, I know you get excited and we get anxious about wanting them to build comb. The whole idea of making them build comb. The bees are going to do this on their own pace. What we need to do, though, is in the very beginning, for those of you who have just hived your packages, that have just got a swarm, maybe you're starting out this year, you should only have the single deep box on. Until they're filling out, if it's a 10 frame box, then they should have filled and worked 8 out of 10 of those frames. If it's an 8 frame, then 6 out of 8, that kind of thing. Then, when they've built up and are using that and they're industrious, then we add the medium super or whatever kind of super you're going to put on from there. And we can expect them then, if they're queen right, if there's nectar and resources coming in, and if the brood is building, they will have the bee power to get up there and draw out those wax foundations. But checkerboarding and manipulating the frames and trying to force the bees to make comb that they're not yet ready to make doesn't generally work. So, and also you'd be meddling with them a lot, and these are all things that you're going to have to fix later. So I highly recommend not trying what Martin's trying to do here. But instead, when you do put that medium super on, and there are foundations that bees draw out better. So we know that if you're using a plastic foundation, for example, in a wooden frame, the more wax that's on it, beeswax, by the way, the quicker they'll work it. But they won't work it unless it's in their own time. And that's the other thing I've noticed, is the smaller spaces, they tend to work up these details quicker, because remember, they need warmth as well as resources too when they're building comb. So that's why the nucleus hives that we did, the 5 frames, and then we did the 5 over 5s, the ones that had that configuration, because now we're talking 10 deep frames. So we have 2 nucleus colonies, hives, 1 colony. So 2 boxes, and then if we had a 10 frame standard Langstroth box right next to it, which ones get built out quicker? The ones that have the 5 over 5 built those upper frames and drew them out faster than the bees right next door in a 10 frame single deep with the same number of frames and space available. So that tells me that they built up faster directly above their brood frames because of the warmth and everything that was directly above it. So smaller spaces at the beginning can kick them off and they respond better to it. It's very interesting stuff, but I highly recommend not doing this kind of frame manipulation, trying to force the bees to draw comb. I would leave them in the arrangement that they currently have. Question number 3, Michael from Marion, Texas. Thinking about spreading nematodes around my apiary to help fight off beetles, mites, ants, and most of all, chiggers. Have you ever tried this, and if so, were the results good? And any recommendation on what nematodes to purchase? Now this comes up. This is a frequent conversation for people that have small hive beetles. And I do have an opinion about it, and it's an informed opinion, scientifically supported. Because that's where you go with stuff like this, because everybody wants to sell you nematodes, and somebody's sitting there right now going, Fred, what's a nematode? What kind of toads are these, and what's going on? What do they do? Nematodes look like tiny worms, really tiny. And they have nothing to do with amphibians. And so what they are, and the reason that I'm glad this question is asked is because they are not all the same. In fact, we know that we have entomologists, right? They study insects. Did you know that there are nematologists, people that study nematodes exclusively? Did you also know that there's a journal of nematology? That's right. So that's where I did my research in response to this answer. So here's the thing. First of all, the small hive beetle larvae. Small hive beetles, I don't personally have a problem with them, but nematodes are on my short list of things to do if I wanted to deal with them, if I had them in any significant number. And I notice here that Michael runs down a list of all the things he wants those things to kill. Well, there are lists of pests because in the larvae state, that's when the nematodes go after them because they parasitize the larvae, they move into them and they reproduce into them and they consume them. And then also that means that your nematodes are going to reproduce and be more plentiful in the soil. And also certain soil types have to exist in order for them to be successful in reproduction. And that goes for the small hive beetle larvae as well as nematodes themselves. So this is not a straightforward, easy answer. And there are a lot of different nematodes, by the way, that all predate on the small hive beetle larvae to some degree. But this is interesting because the small hive beetles, people see them. And by the way, they don't look very small to me. Those beetles are actually pretty darn big when you compare them to the honeybees. But they get inside your hive and they eat a variety of things. What are they eating inside the hive? They're going after the pollen and even pollen subs and pollen patties in some cases. That's why you hear people talk about leaving your pollen patties on. They can become reproductive territory for your small hive beetles, and that's true. They also can get into your honey. And when they've reproduced and their larvae are scooting around, they slime the honey and they ruin everything, and they can also feed on brood. Did you know that? Very interesting stuff. So they're bad news all around. If your bees are not keeping your small hive beetles under control and keeping them out of the hive, you might have to do something about that. So one of the ways that we do it is breaking the reproductive cycle. And Jamie Ellis, Dr. Ellis, down at University of Florida, did a really interesting talk about this, and it's searchable on YouTube, so you can look up Jamie Ellis and small hive beetle biology. And he talked about their larvae that got out of the lab and went downstairs and out a door and across a parking lot and into the ground far away. So here's the thing. They enter a phase where these larvae have to leave the hive and they drop onto the ground and then they can scoot around. What do you think that phase is known as? It's the wandering phase. So that's very interesting too. So they're called small hive beetle wandering larvae. Now this is where they're going to enter the soil when they find suitable soil to get into. So if that's in your bee yard, in your backyard apiary, wouldn't it be cool if you had some ambush predators sitting in the soil ready and waiting for those larvae to hit? Because if we interrupt them at that stage and they get predated upon, then their cycle's interrupted and you're not going to see a bunch of small hive beetles back. Here's my thoughts on this before I go further into which nematodes to get, because some of you are rapid clickers and you go shopping right away as soon as you think there's a silver bullet. I want you to think about small hive beetles and how they get to your hive. Do you think the small hive beetles that are getting into your beehives are coming from directly under your hives? I don't think they are. And we know that they can fly great distances. They have these little club antennae that come up and they can smell the hive, especially when there's a bunch of pollen in there. And that scent carries, and then they fly in and they go straight into your hive, right on the landing board, and they scoot right in if your bees are not on good guard duty and they don't keep them out. So the reason I bring this up is I don't want everyone to jump on the fact that these have proven to have efficacy against the small hive beetle larvae, and then you think you're going to spray them 80 or 100 feet around your hives and have it all under control. Because these beetles can travel, you may not. So that's the cautionary tale. But anyway, of all the species, I'm going to mess up this pronunciation. So I'm going to spell it for you. I'm going to guess that it's Steinernema corpacapsae, and I'll spell it for you. Steinernema, and then Carpocapsae. That is the species of nematode that had 94% efficacy against the small hive beetle larvae. Now, because there's a shotgun list of different things that wanted to be dealt with here, ants, chiggers, all this other stuff, I did read some reviews on the stuff, and it works on flea larvae and things like that. But I can't make a personal recommendation on my own observation, but I am going to link the Journal of Nematology study and show you what they've done here. And then I went on because I know somebody's going to say, well, if you bought them, how much would they cost? So I even looked those up. And they're available on Amazon, if you can believe it. And that's this specific species. So you want to look for that. And these are the ambush hunter types. There are others that are like missile seekers, you know. They get in the ground and they actively hunt out different larvae of other species of insects, right? So if you want the nematodes that hunt and seek, they actually proved less effective. So 80% maybe. But these are ambush hunters. Anyway, for 10 million of these, and that's a tiny baggie, by the way, so don't let the numbers fool you. 10 million of them is $56.99. And if you get 100 million of them, that's $114.99. And it seems like the reviews are pretty widespread. Some of the people are very impressed by them. They love them. They absolutely work. And other people are like, well, they didn't kill this or they didn't kill that. And the reason they're disappointed is because I think a lot of them may fail to understand nematodes are not just nematodes. There are a number of them and a lot of different species of nematodes, and they have very specific reproductive needs when they parasitize other animals. So, and how long do the small hive beetles pupate in the soil? That was another interesting thing. So, the kind of soil that you have, and it gets down to the soil grain size. Kind of interesting. Temperature and moisture levels. It could take them from 13 days to 74 days to reproduce. So, for example, up here in the northern United States, I think we're just too cold. I think the soil isn't really that conducive for them. That's why I don't have a lot of small hive beetles. We have we have extended winters. We have cold temperatures. So those of you who live in the north, I think it's why this is such a big thing in the south. And that's it. Not all soil types support nematodes. So that would be the other thing. Make sure that the soil type that you have is conducive for your nematodes. Otherwise, you just wasted $56.99 if you're dumping them down on clay soil, and it turns out that that's not the soil they need to survive. Yeah, and you mix them with water, and it goes into a sprayer, and I think that $56 one includes a sprayer that you hook on your garden hose. Probably not a good idea if your garden hose has chlorinated water, so people that are on wells and things like that, I don't know, I'm just guessing that you might want to make sure that the chlorinated water in your garden hose in the city somewhere does not kill your nematodes. Food for thought, but the link will be there if you want to see it. Look down in the video description. Anyway, next one, question number 4. This is from Kathy from Houston, Texas. Did you have success using the swarm trap you purchased from the Blythewood Bee Company? Okay, so it's a good question. A few years ago, Blythewood Bee Company had this thing called the Swarm Trooper. Swarm Trooper seemed good. It was modeled after all the space requirements that Dr. Seeley did in the Honeybee Democracy and things like that. And I got several of them, put them together, did a video demonstration on it. In fact, I'll link the video and it will show you exactly what they were. And the reason I say that is I saw a recent video with Randy McCaffrey, Dirt Rooster. He got the new version. So the new version has a different entrance hole. It has a different rack system inside for your frames. But to walk that back a little bit, none of my swarm troopers collected swarms. So, but other people that watched the video that got the swarm troopers, some people had really good luck with them. So they seemed really cool because they're lightweight, not like the big wooden ones. Currently I have wooden ones in the woods. And all those are double deep nucleus hives, so nucleus boxes with little round entrances, because entrance diameter, entrance opening space is another thing that was studied that determined whether or not bees were comfortable with certain size openings, and the small openings were the most successful. And I noticed that with the new swarm troopers, the old one had this big fold down front, and so it was pretty wide. The new one is just a small circle. So maybe those are working. If you're using the new swarm troopers, let us know how they're working. I did not get a single swarm in any of mine. So, but again, there's new ones. So maybe people will share what they know, what their experience is, and of course, read reviews on them. They're probably available on Amazon. Go to Blythewood Bee Company. Blythewood Bee Company, by the way, they're the ones that make Swarm Commander and things like that, so your lures. And check them out. But for me personally, I did not catch any swarms of them. Question number 5. Sunny Slope Honey is their YouTube name. My hubby and thinking on, let's see, so my hubby and me maybe, we're thinking on how we're wanting to change over to bee weaver bees. We started with Russian bees. Hobby beekeeping for 7 years with 16 to 10 hives. 10 hives right now. So it says, what else? We give away hives when they get too much for us through friends in our bee club. My question, how do we switch over to bee weaver? Order new queens for all, and this is May 9th of 2022. I can't get queens until June. I've thought if we do this, I could remove all the drone cells now. Would that hurt the hive? Thank you so much. Okay, so number of moving parts here. One is that we have 10 hives, and you want to swap out queens ultimately and have bee weaver stock. Are all of these bees not performing well? I guess is my first question, because how well the colonies are performing, I don't know if I'd be quick to get rid of their existing queens unless they're not holding their own, if they're just being wiped out by varroa or something like that. And if they are, you want to do a really good treatment. So one of the advantages of removing all the queens at once. Let's say they're all terrible, they're all performing bad. You don't want them to, the brood patterns are bad. That means like shotgun patterns and things like that. Or you're getting super high mite counts and you just have problems all the way along. We're only dealing with 10 hives. So what can we do in this apiary to get a good start? First of all, you have to make sure that the queens that are coming in are going to make it, or you could end up queenless. But they do guarantee their queens, so if you're going to Bee Weaver, don't forget to tell them Frederick Dunn sent you. You get no discount, but I just like for them to know that I sent people. You could pull all of your queens, one from every hive. And then you can wait until every hive is broodless. And why would I suggest doing that? That's because as soon as all of your colonies are broodless, you can treat with oxalic acid vaporization, and then you can install your new queens shortly after that. You don't have to wait 21 days. Because, this is my thinking, so, because after 21 days, you risk laying workers. So you have to write this out on your calendar. So the day that you're going to go through every hive and pull all your queens, you put that down on your calendar, the day queens are removed. So now we know any eggs that they laid in your hive are now in production, right? So they're going to spend 3 days as an egg, and by the 9th day, they're going to be capped. So they're going to be in the pupa state, and then they're going to go until their 21st day when they're going to emerge from their capped pupa cells, right? So then you have adult bees. You don't wait the full 21 days, and that's because we don't want to, again, start laying workers. That's the risk. But if we get the new queens in, we're going to put their cages in there, and you know that's going to take 2 to 3 days for the new queens to get into, to have the workers get in and release those queens. So that's 2 to 3 days. Then we know if those queens lay eggs, how long do we have before they start to cap those and we start to have a hiding place for Varroa destructor mites. 9 days total from the time they started laying the egg, right? So you have this overlap where you can install your new queens even while they're still capped brood present, but then when they're hatching, you still have a period where they're all going to be open, and that's why you should draw it out on paper so you make no mistakes. Then you can hit all 10 of your hives with oxalic acid vaporization and take out more than 90% of existing mites there if that's your current problem. But if I had queens in my apiary that were doing extremely well, Russians are known for doing well, by the way. They can be a little salty sometimes, people say. But if they're good in every other way, there's no reason to do all of them. So I would just, I would keep my top performers and get rid of those that aren't, and then I would write it out on a schedule to show these overlaps to make sure that we have a 3-day period or whatever in there before they get capped and we have an opportunity to wipe out our small hive beetles, which would then be phoretic. They would be on the bodies of the bees, and we can get them all. So that's what I would do. And then, so me personally, I never take all of my queens out of all of my hives and then replace them all. If somebody's performing badly, then, or if I suddenly have no queen, which doesn't happen to me anymore because I now keep these nucleus banks. But if I have really poor performers or something and I want to just refresh the stock, the genetics locally, I bring in bee weavers. Last year I installed 1. So I made all my own queens and had really good wintering. They're doing very good now. And so I don't just swap them out for, routine. But if I need a queen, if it's a ditch effort, end of the year, I have a queenless colony in September or something like that, and I don't have the time to let them make a new queen or to put, brood into that one, that's when I fly in an emergency queen, and that's what I did last year. So good luck with that, and let us know what you decide and how it works. But it's an opportunity for a very good treatment, by the way. Question number 6. Chuck from Akron, Ohio. I'm a first-year beekeeper with 2 8-frame Langstroth hives. My question is, once a swarm gathers in a tree or wherever and the scout bees locate a new location, how do the bees communicate to the queen that they found the location and that it's time to go to that location? Does the queen just follow the swarm? How does the colony get her to go to that new location? The short answer, yes, the queen follows the swarm. Queen is not leading diddly. They drive her out of the colony that she left. There are scouts that are in charge of everything, and they're the ones that, once the queen lands, though, she kind of picks a place to land. That's where this intermediate bivouac comes from. They don't necessarily lead her to a tree branch or something where she's supposed to land. So the queen flies out, she lands on something nearby, and there she bivouacs. And the rest of them collect around her, and while they're doing that, the scouts are still going. Scouts have been trying to find a new place even before that swarm left their parent hive. So then a lot of things happen. I believe, I didn't look it up, but I believe this is covered in the Honeybee Democracy with Dr. Tom Seeley. That's his book, one of many. And there are a lot of bees that keep the swarm once they leave the bivouac location and they're on their way to their final destination, the cavity that they're going to move into. There are streaker bees, and these are not bees that ditch their clothing. These are bees that streak through the swarm in a very specific direction. So it's kind of like when somebody's bicycling and they're having a tough time and other people are circling around them. You can make it, and they keep like leading up ahead and coming back and joining and then leading up ahead. Streaker bees do that, and those that know the location that they're all headed to, They are leading the way and keeping everyone on track by streaking through the swarm, and the swarm moves at about 6 miles an hour, so you could jog after them. But how do they get this communication going at the bivouac site? They do that through waggle dancing, just the same way they communicate resources and things like that. So they all waggle dance. That way most of the workers know where to go, and the queen is along for the ride. So she kind of goes with the group. And it's been funny too, because sometimes the queen, when they're going into the hive, won't necessarily go in right away. And you'll see the workers flying out and in over and over until eventually you see the queen finally go in there. And then that's when they settle and start Nasonoff glands and everything else. So queen's not in charge. She's along for the ride, and she can even be stubborn sometimes. But they constantly redirect and continue to reinforce the direction that they're headed into. Question number 7. This is Robert from Batesville, Arkansas. I built a long lang using your plans with the shim for space beneath the frames. I installed a healthy nuke with 8 frames of heavy wax foundation, and the bees are building lots of comb into that space. At the 2-week inspection, when lifting frames, some comb broke off and fell to the bottom. I found the queen, but it would easily be possible for her to be down there along with other things we can't see. What's your plan for handling these issues on these hives? By the way, the plans are great. So that's many thanks to Ross, who drew up the plans. I'll do a link, by the way, to these plans. They are free. You can go to my website and take a look at them and see if you like it too. But anyway, if you have a standard Langstroth deep and you have deep frames, so we're talking about a deep frame like this. Let's say that's a 1-piece acorn heavy wax frame. But what happens is, normally have a small space under that, mindful of bee space, which is 3/8 of an inch. But sometimes people use spacers below that. So what I did was, in my long Langstroth hive, I created an option which is a 3 3/4 inch space beneath here. So it's a big space. And that's because oftentimes people want to know, how can we get beeswax out of that without destroying the frames? Scraping trim, burr comb, and things like that doesn't often produce a lot of wax. And so I did that for a couple of reasons. One is, whenever you have space beneath these frames, the bees will build additional comb on the bottom of these frames. And what kind of comb do you think that will be? 9 times out of 10, that is drone comb. So a couple of things happen. It satisfies 2 needs. One is, when they do that, you can scrape it off during your inspection. You pull the frame up, and I'll get into pulling the frame up so it doesn't break off. But you pull the frame up, you've got comb down here, you scrape that right off into a bucket with your drone cells, with your drone comb, because what's going to be in the capped drone? Your Varroa destructor mites also. So it's part of your integrated pest management system too. So you're getting beeswax, and you're getting drones out, and you're getting your Varroa destructor mites out. Now, we don't necessarily want to get rid of drones, but we're using them in this case to remove Varroa destructor mites. So the other thing is, when they build that new wax under there, it's pretty delicate, and that's why when you're pulling up frames, and I'm not saying that that's what happened here with Robert, but when you pry your frames up, lift them straight up, because that new wax is very delicate. So if you lean it a little bit and it's got brood, or if they've started to put nectar and things like that in it, because they can do that too with drone cells, if it falls off in the bottom, as described, it risks falling on bees that are down there. Very unusual that your queen would be on the bottom of your hive, but that doesn't mean she couldn't be. So there's a risk. And that's also when people are breaking up frames and stuff, and honey is dripping down in there, and they're cutting away the bridge comb and stuff like that. And the same thing can happen. You can actually drown the queen. So pull them up straight. And the other thing is, I don't ever pull frames out of the middle of a run. I always start at the end, pull it to the side, then lift it up. And while I'm pulling it to the side, I can see if it's actually attached or connected to an adjacent frame or something like that. And then I reach in with a long knife and make that cut, right? So, and you do each frame, pull it out a little bit, then lift it, pull out, then lift. And that way we're not also taking the chance that we're going to roll bees that are in between these frames, because that space is very narrow And the face of your honeycomb is often irregular and it matches the face of the adjacent comb. So if we just pull it straight up without pulling it across, we rake the comb against each other and we run the risk of rolling bees, and that could be your queen. So that's the reasoning behind that. Glad you like the plans. Glad somebody built them. And guess what? No one has done yet. No one has sent me a picture of them with their long Langstroth or your standard Langstroth hive. But they're both there. Plans are free. Check them out. If you like them, you're free to build them. Question number 8, moving on. And this is Beth from Vermilion, Ohio. Your ideal standard hive configuration does not state you are using the hive gates. If you could have them on all of your hives, would you? I bought one from Better Bee, but it won't ship until the queen cage frames holders are being shipped. Thanks for that. Heads up, I got one. So those queen cages we talked about when Dr. Peck was here. And that's part of creating, again, another brood break so that you could do your oxalic acid vaporization treatments. But what Beth is talking about here, these are hive gates. We did hive gate videos. I suppose I should put a link to that just in case you don't know what they are. These are being reviewed, by the way. So last winter was the first time. These are invented in New Zealand, and they're by BIQ Solutions. And by the way, we've sent out the citizen science group that participated in evaluating these, so we sent a survey out, and I've not seen the compiled results yet regarding how well they worked for people. And because we're evaluating it, they're only on half of my colonies. So I don't have the final word on them, and so to answer that question, I would not put them on all of my Langstroth hives, and it's not part of my standard Langstroth configuration. Why is that? Because it's still under review. So I'm counting on probably people that have a lot of problems with wasps and raiding and things like that, sending really good results to that. And that's probably the number one function. I know the inventor, Kyle, who did this, there's a lot going on with the configuration and how it benefits your bees in your hive. And so we're waiting to get a lot more data compiled. But for now, and you're right, Better Bee is selling these. And I was really glad that they got involved because they created the survey for me. So that turned out to be good because I didn't know to use SurveyMonkey or whatever the heck to do it. And there's Google Survey and everything else. Anyway, the surveys are out. The results are not in. They're on 50% of my colonies. I can say that here because people are going to have different experiences with them across the world, wherever they're in use. But I noticed that my colonies that had double entrances on them going through winter did not do as well as those that just had the single hive gate entrance. So that was interesting. So if I went through another winter and put them on Langstroth hives, they would have the single entrances on, not the doubles. And I did not have troubles with them being plugged up. Some people said they noticed that there were difficulty of the bees pulling out dead bees and cleaning up inside the hive through them. And so that was not my experience here. They were cleaning out their hives just fine. So chilled brood and stuff like that, when we had the weird weather in spring, they were cleaning out through the hive gates just fine. So it's important to get a consensus from a lot of different climates, a lot of different environments and things like that so that we'll know how it works well. And the inventor needs to come out with his final kind of study. They need to do a paper. And I know he's got some things in the works so that they can really get a good analysis of what it's good for, how well it does it, and what the configuration should be, because I also messed it up a little bit, which is why it's really great that we're not just doing this test in my own apiary, because I put it on slatted racks. And so I had the double, there's 2 inches of space between the slatted rack and your brood box. And the way these are designed, it's supposed to go right in. You're supposed to have your brood straight over the top of it. And so I had a little discussion about that, and I thought, well, but the brood where I live in wintertime, they might start down here, but as winter progresses, the brood's going to move up and away from it. They're going to be up here in my medium box above the deep, and so it won't be in intimate contact with this conduit here. So there's a lot to be worked out on that, because I think my bees moved away from it, just their normal progression through winter. And so I don't know how that affected that. So for me, probably the best tool was that robbing. You cut down on robbing. So, but then the thermodynamics and things like that, other potential positive benefits to that. But for people that normally lost several hives, a large percentage of their apiaries, due to wasp predation at the end of the year. So when the wasp numbers are really up, end of September time frame for us, that's when they were actually losing a large percentage of their apiaries just due to robbing from wasps. And then once their defenses were down, once the guard bees had been killed by the wasps, then even honeybees could move in and rob them out because their defenses are down. So very good in that regard. So here's the last one. And this is from Jennifer. It says, I came out to check on my hive and noticed moisture coming out of the entrance from inside the hive. My configuration is screened bottom board with the insert, a 10 frame deep, the ultimate insulated inner cover, a 3-inch feeder shim, a rapid round with sugar syrup, and an insulated outer cover. The bees exiting the hive were wet and not happy. I just removed the insert and noticed the cluster of bees very close to the bottom board. I also have the entrance reducer at the smallest opening. I'm scared that the queen has been killed by the moisture, but I just installed this package 3 days ago, and based on research, I'm not supposed to inspect this soon. Okay, well, a couple of things here. When she first told me about this issue, I thought we're talking about a spring colony that had been through winter, which often happens if you've got multiple boxes and you go into winter. At the end of the year, you've got this huge population of bees. And then what happens is, through attrition, as we go into winter, you get a smaller and smaller cluster of bees. Something can happen to your queen, and then they're not replaced. And then we've got more space in there than the bees can manage. This also happens a lot where you generate a lot of moisture when you have capped honey that's still in the hive, that's not being used by the bees, and we have these dramatic temperature fluctuations in spring. So we've got really cold stuff at night. Again, because it's a small colony of bees, they're not really covering a big surface area. They should be focused this time of year over their brood. And so what you end up with are surfaces of honey that's capped, and the honey gets really cold and causes condensation, creates a challenging environment for the bees. But then I found out it's a package of bees that's just been installed. So then you wonder, where is the condensation coming from? Well, there's a rapid round feeder on top that's got syrup in it because it's a new package install and trying to get them going. But here's where it wasn't mentioned initially, but Jen said that she also put in drawn comb. So I don't know if that means it's capped honey or just drawn comb. So I'll say this in general terms, that if you're trying to fortify a brand new installed package of bees, and you take leftover capped honey from other colonies and put them in there, if your colony is not big enough, that can be a source of condensation. And that's also because a couple of things have happened. One, we're in spring, so there's a nectar flow on. And we've also put sugar syrup on top as a backup. And we've got honey in there. So with a nectar flow coming through the door and sugar syrup on top, they're not going to be opening and using any capped honey that we've provided them with, and that's because they instinctively hold capped honey as an emergency reserve, which they don't need this time of year. So for me, setting up a brand new colony, and the other thing is, backtrack a little bit, always make sure your hives are tipped towards the landing board a little bit. So if there turns out to be a leak in that rapid round or something else is going on, we want it to run out the front, and we don't want it to drip down on your cluster of bees that appears to not be happy. The good news is I got a follow-up from Jen who said that they're still bringing in plenty of pollen and things like that, so things are probably looking okay. But if you have moisture running out of the front of your hive, those are things to consider. And when I'm putting in a package of bees, if I were doing that this time of year, right now, or within the last couple of weeks, I would not be fortifying them with frames of capped honey. just because they're not going to use it. But I would have sugar syrup on top and make sure nothing leaks. So that's the other first thing that came to my mind is, wow, there has to be a leak somewhere. So I hope that everything works out. Anyway, that's the last question of the day. So now we're into the fluff section. And first thing, who am I going to give a shout out to this week? Somebody that you need to check out. Somebody that's good, that really is providing a service to beekeepers all over the place. Now we know that the horizontal hives are super fun to work with. And most people build them themselves. So my long Langstroth horizontal hive weighs a lot. So even before you put frames and things like that in it, because I build them out of really thick stock, it's a two-man deal to carry it out and put it on your support. And the support stand has to be really strong. On average, they hold about 30 frames, all deep frames. So once those, if we average 7 pounds per frame, if it's capped honey, you can understand this runs into a lot of weight. So the thing is, you don't see them sold in stores. Like you're not going to go to Better Bee and buy a horizontal hive. Now, you can get them from horizontalhive.com, which is Dr. Leo Sharashkin, but those are not the long Langstroth hives. Those are Layens hives. Totally different, distinctive frames, and a lot of equipment compatibility problems, which I've been through for the last couple of years now. Well, starting last year. Trying to get my Layens hive going was not easy. I needed a swarm to do it. But anyway, my shout out goes to horizontalbees.com. And I'll put a link down below, and that is the Rourke family. And the reason I bring them up, let's see, Randy McCaffrey has one of those that he gave to his dad because his dad is a beekeeper and he can't lift hives anymore very well. So the horizontal hives really help out like that. So he went to horizontalbees.com for that. They were at the Hive Life Conference down in Tennessee. And the second day of the conference, every single horizontal hive they made was sold and done. You couldn't buy one. So the reason I'm giving a shout out to them is because they're making an excellent product. It's already painted. There are a lot of customization options on their website. There are a lot of add-ons. You can get a really well-insulated version that goes for the north, and that's critical. If you're going to be in the north, you want to have your horizontal hive insulated. And they work with you. So if there's something that you want, some unique thing that you want done just for your specific considerations, they even have one that's got flow frames in it. Not endorsing that you put flow frames in a horizontal hive configuration, but I am definitely giving a shout out to the company as doing great things and just making a quality product and providing a service that no one else is doing. And shipping, I looked it up today, is under $200, which is not bad for a horizontal hive. And so anyway, visit them. They also have a YouTube channel. I'm going to provide a link for that. You can check that out. Another thing that I want people to be aware of, especially first-year people, when you're coming out of your first winter, swarms can catch you off guard. You know, you're mowing your yard and you look over and there they are. They're in a tree branch or something right by your beehives. So these are things to consider having on hot standby just in case you notice a swarm or one of your friends calls and says, hey, there's a swarm in my yard. You don't want to be waiting a long time because it does happen to people that you're too late in the day and it's getting dark already and you can't really do anything about them. Or a big rainstorm comes in, or they fly away by the time you get all your stuff together. So these are things that I recommend people have suited up, ready for your rapid deployment swarm collection. And one is obviously a bee suit. If you're more casual, at least a bee jacket or a veil. You don't know these bees. Now, swarms historically are very, non-defensive. They're very easy to manage, and you'll figure that out right away. Because you're going to go there and you're going to see them and you're going to see how accessible they are and, how approachable they are and everything else. Because here's one of the reasons why you need to be careful when you're approaching some of these big swarms, prime swarms in spring. You don't know what they've been through. You don't know if there's not a neighborhood kid there that just got a brand new slingshot that's been trying it out. You don't know if the reason they're calling you is because they're already starting to sting people. We don't know what kind of stress they're under. So just be prepared, because you're not going to get back in your car and go back and get more protective equipment. So have a bee suit, jacket, and a veil handy, just so you can go out there and collect the bees. bring a set of trimmers, because often you have to clip off a tree branch or something like that. You might have to get tree branches out of the way. Always get permission from the owner to do that. And then, of course, you can shake your stuff into your box, or what I like to do is a large butterfly net. So that leads me to another piece of gear that you might have. Mix up some sugar syrup, 1-to-1 sugar syrup in one of those big spray bottles. Now you might think, yeah, but that stuff's just going to spoil, so I can't really pre-mix it and have it staged. Yes, you can, because you're going to put, I highly recommend, see, I'm not telling you have to, but I'm recommending 2 teaspoons of Honeybee Healthy. Here it is right here. 2 teaspoons of Honeybee Healthy in your 1-to-1 sugar syrup. And I had that stuff on the rack to see how long it lasted, and it was over 6 months before it started to show any of that black mold. So that gives you an opportunity to pre-stage it. So add it to your gear, have that squirter ready to go. 1-to-1 sugar syrup, because what does that do for them anyway? When they're in a cluster on that tree branch or so on, you can spritz them with that. It gives them emergency resources on a nice hot day because they are thirsty. The other thing is it adds weight to them and sticks them kind of all together. So when you shake them, they'll fall right down into your bucket, into your butterfly net, into your box, whatever you're doing. And it gives them a resource right then. Plus, the smell of Honeybee Healthy helps kind of confuse them a little bit, maybe. We don't know, but it definitely works to extend your sugar syrup. Now, what do I collect them with? I like to use my super big butterfly net. To me, that is my favorite because when I shake them into the butterfly net, I disconnect the butterfly net from the pole, and I put it right inside the 10-frame box that I've brought, or a Hive Butler tote is my current favorite thing. And I put it right in there, close it up. There you go. They've got something to hang on to. They've got the syrup to eat and everything else. Now, on the other side of that, don't squirt them at all if, see, for example, they might be in the soffit of a building. They might be in some structure you can't shake. So that's where a bee vacuum comes into play. And my favorite bee vacuum for collecting them is my Colorado Bee Vac. And I got the extra intake tube. And the intake tube for the Colorado Bee Vac, the interior surface is not corrugated like a standard shop vac. It's actually smooth. So that means less tumbling and injury to the bees on their way. And I got the 30-footer. So you could actually set your bee vac in somebody's yard and go right up into their attic with it or something and not worry about it. But you don't spray them with sugar syrup for obvious reasons. If you're using the bee vac, you want them to be dry and not sticking to each other and plugging up your vacuum on the way. So the large net, Hive Butler totes. Hive Butler totes have screen tops. It's very convenient. Put them right in the back of your car and drive home. And then because Hive Butler totes are plastic and smooth on the inside, when you go to dump them into your beehive, you can just dump them. But if you're patient, right, like I talked about in the very beginning, set up your Hive Butler tote right in front of the hive, put it in physical contact with the front of the hive. This is very important, by the way. Physical contact with the front of the hive, right where the entrance is. And then take the lid off and see your bees start to go in there. And you'll find out it's a very easy way to transfer bees if you're patient, if you have the time, if you want to watch them and you don't want to shake and jam them around, and you don't even have to open the hive. See, while they're checking out the entrance, you can go ahead and fill your rapid round in there or whatever you're doing to give them emergency resources, and then you'll find out those bees will move in. And what happens if they don't move in all at once? If they don't all go in and there's another cluster that stays in there, check for a second queen. And in closing, look away for those of you who don't like it when I promote something that I'm selling, because that's what I'm about to do. Look away. So that was the cover shot today. That is my new macro photo of a honeybee with pollen on her corbicula, face deep in a dandelion blossom, and look, it wraps around the entire coffee cup. And this year, for the first time ever, for me, they were on the violets too. So that coffee cup is on Teespring, and there's a free shipping discount. It's called Fred Ship, Fredship. So it's Teespring, the way to be. And you can get that coffee cup. And it's really popular right now. It came out last week. So thank you to those of you who have bought those. I hope you enjoyed our talk today, and I hope you have a really good weekend ahead and that you're ready to collect those swarms, make those splits, and keep your own bees at home. Don't let those things get away. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Put your own comments in the comment section down below and follow the link in the video description if you'd like to submit a comment to me through my website, thewaytobee.org. Thanks for being here. Have a great weekend.